"Don't touch that door, mister. There's something wrong under your car." The voice was small. It came from somewhere below the level of the crowd, below the briefcases and the polished shoes and the hurried legs of people who had somewhere important to be. Silas Drummond had just walked out of the Harrington County Courthouse into the kind of afternoon that felt like a reward. Pale gold light, a breeze that carried the last of the morning cool, and the particular quiet satisfaction of a man who had spent 31 years building something that nobody could take from him. He had won, not in the small procedural way that lawyers win things on paper. He had won completely. The arbitration panel had ruled in his favor on every count, and the company he had built from a single rented office on the west side of the city was now officially and irrevocably his. The man who had tried to strip it from him, his former business partner of 11 years, had sat at the table across from him and watched it happen with a face like stone. Drummond Logistics, his name, his company, his again. He was thinking about none of that when the voice reached him. He stopped walking. His hand was already on the rear door handle of the black car idling at the curb, a long, quiet vehicle with tinted windows and a driver who had worked for him for 6 years. He turned around, expecting to find someone he knew. A junior associate, a paralegal, anyone. Instead, he found a girl. She was standing on the bottom step of the courthouse, maybe 6 years old, wearing a yellow dress that had been washed so many times the color had gone soft at the edges. Her hair was done in 2 puffs on either side of her head, one of which had come partially loose. She was looking directly at him with an expression that did not belong on a 6-year-old's face. Not frightened exactly, but serious in the way that children are serious when they have decided something matters. "Excuse me?" "Under your car," she said again. "A man was under there. I saw him." Drummond looked around. His driver, a steady, unhurried man named Cole, had come around from the front and was standing a few feet away. His 2 attorneys were still on the steps behind him, talking. The sidewalk was moving with the usual after-lunch traffic. Delivery workers, a woman with a stroller, a man eating a sandwich. "What man?" Drummond asked. The girl pointed, not at the car, but at the corner of the block where the side street met the main avenue. "He already left," she said. "He had a gray shirt and he was under your car for a long time. I counted to almost 100. Cole looked at Drummond. Drummond looked at Cole. "Where's your mom?" Drummond asked. "With my grandma," the girl said. "Inside. Grandma had to sit down because her legs hurt. Mom told me to wait on the steps." She hesitated, then added, as though this explained something, "I wasn't supposed to leave the steps, but you were going to get in the car." There was a particular silence that follows a statement like that. Not a comfortable silence. The kind that makes a person take stock of where they are standing and whether they want to continue standing there. "Cole," Drummond said, not raising his voice. "Already calling," Cole said, his phone already at his ear. Drummond turned back to the girl. He crouched down, something his knees reminded him he was 61 years old to do, so that his face was closer to level with hers. Up close, she had a small gap between her 2 front teeth and a scab on her chin from something recent. "What's your name?" he asked. "Marisol," she said. "Marisol. That's a good name." He kept his voice even. Calm. The same voice he used in depositions when he needed someone to believe he was not alarmed. "Can you tell me what the man looked like? The one you saw?" She thought about it in the deliberate way children think about things, not rushing. "He was tall," she said. "Taller than you. And he had something on his arm, like a picture. Here." She touched the inside of her own left forearm just below the elbow. "It was black. Like letters, but I couldn't read them from where I was. Okay, what else?" "He had a green bag, not big, like the kind Dad used to bring lunch in." She looked down at her shoes for a moment, white sneakers, one of which was tied crooked, and he talked on his phone. Before he went under. He said something about 3 o'clock. One of Drummond's attorneys, a woman named Frances Quill, who had been practicing law for 24 years and had seen a great many things, came down the steps and stood behind Drummond. She heard the last part. "Silas," she said quietly. "I heard her," Drummond said. He stood up slowly. His eyes went to the car, the long black car with the tinted windows idling at the curb. It was the same car that had picked him up that morning, the same driver, the same route. It was supposed to be a closed circle, private, routine. He thought about who knew he would be here today. Not many people. The arbitration date had been set 3 weeks ago. It had been disclosed to the panel, to the opposing counsel, and to 3 people inside his company. His assistant, his operations director, and the man who had sat across the table from him in that hearing room and watched everything he had tried to take crumble. His former partner. Dale Stroud had known. Drummond stood on the sidewalk in the afternoon light and said nothing for a moment. 3 uniformed officers appeared within 6 minutes. A bomb disposal unit was there in 22. The block was cleared. The black car was searched by people in protective gear while pedestrians watched from behind yellow tape on both ends of the street. The device was real. It was magnetic. It had been attached to the underside of the frame near the rear axle, designed, according to the officer who briefed Drummond afterward, to activate with the vibration of highway driving. The route from the courthouse to Drummond's office involved a 40-minute stretch of interstate. The officer told him all of this in a calm, procedural voice in the parking structures across the street, where Drummond and his attorneys had been taken to wait. When the officer finished, he asked if there was anyone Drummond could think of who might want to do him harm. Drummond gave him Dale Stroud's name without hesitation. But even as he said it, his mind was not on Dale Stroud. It was on a girl in a yellow dress, standing on courthouse steps, counting to 100 while the world moved around her, choosing to break a small rule so a stranger would not walk into something he could not walk back from. He asked about her before they let him leave the parking structure. The officers found her family inside the courthouse. Her mother, a young woman named Sandra, who had the same dark eyes as Marisol and the same serious expression, had come out to look for her daughter when the police cordoned off the street, and had found the whole situation with the combination of relief and exasperation that mothers of small children develop as a survival mechanism. Drummond's assistant arranged the meeting the following morning. He had not slept well. That was not unusual. Sleep had been difficult since the legal proceedings began 9 months ago. But the particular quality of his sleeplessness that night was different. He kept returning to the moment he'd had his hand on the car door, the way the afternoon had felt like a reward, the way he had been standing inside his own satisfaction, insulated by it, not paying attention. He had not heard the girl the first time she spoke. He thought about that. He had been 3 steps ahead of himself, already at the celebration dinner, already reading the emails from people who would hear the news, already somewhere that wasn't the courthouse sidewalk. And a 6-year-old girl who had been told to stay on the steps and stay quiet had made herself heard anyway. The next morning, Sandra came with Marisol, and also with Marisol's grandmother, a woman named Eugenia Reyes, who moved slowly and with a cane, but who sat very straight in the chair, across from Drummond's desk, and met his eyes without wavering. Drummond had asked his assistant to have coffee and juice ready. He had also asked her to clear his morning. He thanked Marisol first. He tried to do it simply, without the overwhelming largeness of what he actually felt, because he had learned that children do not know what to do with adult emotion and often feel responsible for it. "You were very brave," he told her. "You noticed something that none of the adults noticed, and you did something about it. That takes courage." Marisol considered this. Then she said, "I thought maybe I was wrong. But then I thought if I was wrong, nothing bad would happen. And if I was right and I didn't say anything, something bad would happen. So I said something." Frances Quill, who had come with Drummond to this meeting at his request, later told him that was the most accurate summary of moral decision-making she had ever heard from any person of any age. Drummond asked Sandra about their situation, while Marisol drew something on a notepad his assistant had brought her. Sandra was careful with her words. She was not the kind of person who complained easily or accepted charity without knowing what it cost. She told him that they had driven in from Clarksville 3 days ago for Eugenia's medical appointment at the university hospital. The follow-up had taken longer than expected, and the motel where they were staying was more expensive than she had budgeted for. They had another 5 days before they could go home. Drummond nodded. He had already, that morning, made certain calls. "I have a company apartment," he said. "Furnished. It's on the 15th floor of the building on Marchetti Avenue. It's used for visiting contractors and sometimes for clients. It's empty this week and next." He paused. "I would like for you to stay there, at no cost to you." Sandra looked at him. "That's not necessary," she said. "I know it isn't," Drummond said. "I'm offering it because I want to, not because I feel obligated. There's a difference." He folded his hands on the desk. "What happened yesterday, what your daughter did, is not something I can repay. I am aware of that. I'm not trying to. I just don't see why you should spend money on a motel room when there's a comfortable apartment sitting empty 2 miles from the hospital where your mother has appointments." Sandra was quiet for a moment. Eugenia Reyes, who had said nothing since sitting down, spoke then for the first time. "We'll take it," she said. Her voice was dry and certain, the voice of a woman who had learned that pride and stubbornness were different things, and had spent her years sorting out which was which. "Thank you." Drummond looked at Marisol. She had finished drawing and was looking up at him. "What did you draw?" he asked. She slid the notepad across the desk. It was a picture of a car, a wobbly rectangle on 4 circles, with a small figure standing next to it. The figure had a yellow dress. There was a sun in the upper right corner. Drummond looked at it for a long moment. Then he looked at the girl. "Can I keep this?" he asked. She thought about it seriously. "Yes," she said, "but you have to hang it up. Not just put it in a drawer. Deal, he said. Later that week, Dale Stroud was arrested at his home outside the city. The device, the investigators determined, had been placed by a man who had worked briefly as a parking attendant at the courthouse. A man who, when interviewed, confirmed that he had been hired through a third party and paid in cash. The chain of evidence led, with the particular patience of forensic financial work, to Stroud's accounts. It took 11 days. Drummond was not surprised. He had known Dale Stroud for 15 years before the partnership soured, and he had long understood that the man's most dangerous quality was not his temper but his patience. He could wait. He could plan. He had planned this. The timing of the device, the route, the courtroom victory that would have looked, afterward, like the last thing Drummond ever accomplished. Drummond thought about that sometimes in the weeks that followed, the version of that afternoon in which he hadn't stopped, in which the girl had spoken and he hadn't heard her, or had heard her and dismissed her, or had been too wrapped in the ceremony of his own victory to turn around. He had almost been that person. He had been, in fact, on his way to being exactly that person. Hand on the door, mind somewhere else, sailing forward on the momentum of a day that had gone his way. What stopped him was a 6-year-old girl who had counted to 100 and then decided that telling a stranger something uncomfortable was worth the small trouble of leaving the steps. He had the drawing framed. He kept it in his office, not behind his desk where visitors would see it, but on the wall beside the window where he could see it when he was sitting down. It was not the kind of thing he explained to people. Most assumed it was a grandchild's work. He never corrected them. Sandra sent him a text message when they got back to Clarksville. It said that Eugenia's prognosis was better than they'd expected, and that Marisol had talked about the apartment building's elevator for 3 days straight. He read it twice and then set his phone face down on the desk and sat for a while in the quiet of his office in the city that was his, in the company that bore his name. There was a particular feeling that came in moments like this. Not happiness exactly, and not relief, though there was some of both. It was the feeling of having been given something you did not earn and could not deserve. The feeling of being on the right side of an accident, of standing in a place you might not be standing. He had walked out of that courthouse like a man who had everything figured out. He had been rescued by a child who had been told to stay on the steps and stay quiet. He thought, not for the first time and not for the last, that the things that save us rarely announce themselves. They don't look like salvation when they happen. They look like a small voice below the noise of everything else. Easy to miss, easy to walk past, gone in a moment if you don't stop and turn around. He was glad he had turned around.